The story starts with Xiaoyan, our protagonist, in a very critical situation, hanging over a cage full of zombies. His ex-girlfriend who cheated on him made fun of him and reminds him that all his friends have died and that he will be next. In that moment, Xiaoyan feels a deep guilt for having trusted her and longs for she suffered a painful death. The real villain is the ex-girlfriend of our protagonist who, upon finding a new, more powerful and rich boyfriend, has given her requested to exterminate him. This is how this big man accepts the task and proposes to torture the protagonist slowly so that his wife can enjoy the show before finish him off. And since that was not enough, that man with a sarcastic tone thanked Xiaoyan for the supplies which will ensure them comfort for several months. So in a matter of seconds our protagonist falls in the zombie cage, which attack him mercilessly. Tied and suffering, the protagonist can only scream while dreaming with revenge on his ex-girlfriend named Kinji and of the burly man Lai Chuang, mentioning that if ever presents a second chance, he wouldn't hesitate twice. But suddenly Xiaoyan wakes up and listens to Kinji demanding explanations for not having including his name in the deed of the house, thus questioning his love for her. While he tries to compose himself, he realizes that I could have returned before the apocalypse. In his past life, Kingi deceived him by stealing his inheritance of his parents and leaving him on the street. During the global apocalypse turned people into zombies, our protagonist, with the help of his friends, managed to survive and establish a shelter secure with sufficient resources to several months. And at that time Kingi reappeared, feigning desperation and looking for a place to shelter, thus regaining Xiaoyan's sympathy, which he soon realized was a mistake to trust her. The night next he opened the doors of the shelter to their enemies. The trader also demanded 400,000 yen and the house as the price for marry her, acting arrogant. Sure, Xiaoyan was captivated for her beauty and did not see her true character. But this time things would be different, since the protagonist will not let this evil person manipulate him. Although he knows that he must act with caution so as not to raise suspicions, since if get carried away by rage in these moments could be harmful. Kingi gave a week to fulfill her demands, since otherwise the wedding would be cancelled. But unexpectedly Xiaoyan kicked Kingi out of her house, assuring him that he understood the situation. Kingi, surprised by the unexpected attitude of the protagonist, did not understand the change in his behavior. But now that had gotten rid of the traitor, Xiaoyan realized there was only 1 month left for the apocalypse, so he needed prepare urgently. At that time the protagonist received a notification similar to those of a video game. After to activate the apocalypse system, Xiaoyan received a mission called Preparation for the Apocalypse that asked to acquire land and accumulate enough resources for 1 year. By completing this mission, he would earn 10 points which he could use to get rewards in the system store. He was eager for the bonus, and he was wondering what he could get in the store, although he was still not sure what items were available in the store of the system. It mainly offered boxes of loot and potions to increase the physical strength. However, what he was worried the most was his hunger, so he decided to order an elegant dinner home. He remembered, like in his life previously, he had to save every penny to finance the whims of his girlfriend, leaving him in a precarious situation. This time he wasn't going to limit himself, since with the apocalypse about to happen loose and the zombies everywhere, he had to take advantage of the delicious food while he could. After few hours the delivery arrived, and our protagonist could never have 3 stars food before, so decided to start with a 300 yen pork stew. After surviving on basic foods during the apocalypse, that meal it seemed like a real delicacy. The protagonist did not stop there and continued devouring with enthusiasm. When he was about to finish, his phone started to ring. It was Chuya, a friend of Kinji who had already argued with her about the issue, which began to complain furiously about how dare he treat Kinji that way. Chuya insisted that he had to show his love with a gift of property, or otherwise he couldn't affirm that he loved her. According to Chuya, Kinji he was putting it to test, and he had failed. Chuya warned that if he did not bring him the deed of the house and 1 million yen in cash as an apology wouldn't help resolve the misunderstanding, which could result in a frustrated breakup. Frustrated by Chuya's attitude, Xiaoyan thought it would be better get rid of her. Despite the Chuya's attempts to protest the protagonist, he hung up the call, tired of people who were only interested in his money. At that time his priority was find and buy suitable land. He wanted to build a strong fortress that was not only easy to defend, but was also near a source of water and a forest. The next morning came to a real estate agency. He was received immediately by a consultant who asked him if he was here to rent or buy a house. Zioyan clarified that he was not interested in any of those options, but he was looking for something a lot most valuable. Right at that moment, a sales manager came over and asked the consultancy to help move some boxes since they had received a large shipment of paper toilet that day. She tried to explain who had a client, but he couldn't convince no one. The manager Sunun didn't consider Zioyan as a true client, even reprimanded his employee for forgetting everything that had happened to him, convinced that being a good real estate agent requires charisma. Sent her to the backyard and told Zioyan that since he looked like a failure with cheap clothes, probably couldn't even afford to buy a toilet, so he didn't deserve to be treated like a client. The protagonist got upset. The dismissive attitude of the manager looked at others with superiority like this, who asked the manager to repeat your comments and explain his contempt. With an arrogant attitude, manager responded that he considered himself superior to people like Zioyan, and in a provocative gesture he said that if he could afford to buy a toilet he would just eat excrement. Seeing the expression by Zioyan, the manager soon realized that he will regret his words. Then the protagonist in response suggested that look for fresh droppings later, and announced loudly that he was not here to rent or sell a house, but to acquire land. The other clients were surprised to see someone wealthy enough to buy a property, and immediately the lady Zioning invited the protagonist to sit down for a detailed presentation, while the manager Zun watched with distrust, doubting the ability Zioyan to pay. So she showed all available meadows, but he had clear about what he just wanted. He just had to specify his requirements and see if they found anything suitable. Zioyan wanted a piece of land near mountains and water, ideally with running water. Would also be perfect if there were factories or large buildings in the area. To find an option proper, Zioning needed some time, but soon the manager Zun returned to approach from behind as if he had an inclination to do so. He thought that the land that met all the requirements was in the district Oriental District. However, Zioning thought that it was a bad idea since that area it belonged to the tea city that had many unfinished factories and projects pending, so that property would not be attractive to customers. The unfinished factories weren't an inconvenience either, rather represented an advantage. After review everything, Zioyan decided that the land was just what he needed, and he thought that with a barbed wire property would be easy to protect and unfinished factories would save you a lot time and money in construction. So proceeded to buy the land available, signed the contract and pay instantly. Zionin was in a state of shock. She couldn't believe that someone in their right mind would like to purchase land with unfinished factories, but Zioyan remained firm and asked her to speed up the process because there was someone who couldn't wait to eat fresh manure. Soon manager Sunun had the check in the hand without being able to believe that this beggar was willing to pay 300,000 for land with abandoned factories. But in that, Zioyan reminded him before leaving he had completed the payment, and now it was his turn to fulfill his share. The other customers, amused with the situation, began to put pressure on the manager to hurry up since the live broadcast was already started. One of them, though a little displeased, promised that at least manure would be fresh since he just had eaten some shrimp. For another side, the protagonist had already completed the first step when buying the land, and now he needed to find money for supplies. When leaving the agency real estate, he was recognized by Lai Cheng, who was fired up when he saw the chaos that was unleashing inside. The staff and customers were forcing manager Zung to keep his promise while he desperately asked for help and prayed not to have to eat manure. Meanwhile, Kingi was busy painting her nails and enjoying her carefree life. But in that, he received a call from Licheng, who informed him about the purchase of the land by Zioyan. Kingi, surprised by this, she couldn't believe where he got so much money. Lai Chuang earlier discovered that Zioyan had paid 300,000, probably using the money he had saved for her house, which made her very angry. Although Lai Chuan advised her to calm down and talk to Zioyan to understand the situation, she was too angry to do so and planned to exhibit him at the social media. Meanwhile, the protagonist was concerned about the costs of supplies and building his base. All his quiet thoughts were interrupted by a frantic bang on the door. It was Kingi along with her friend. She was still furious because he dared to spend her money, but Zioyan could not understand what she was talking about yet. King Ji, on the other hand, continued thinking and exposing him, stating that he had used the money from the courtship price for buy land. That money belonged to her, and since he had bought the land with that also belonged to her. The protagonist didn't even know how to respond to the follies of that woman. He finally decided to explain things to her in a way that even a fool like her could understand. He had a lot of money, but he wasn't going to spend a single cent on her. Also told her that he knew about his romance with Lai Chuan. King Ji didn't understand what was happening and how he knew all that, in that her friend, watching how things were developing, suggested everyone to calm down and resolve this little misunderstanding as a couple. But Zioyan was not going to waste his precious time with those two. So he made it clear to her that there was no misunderstanding at all, since he knew that King Ji was the fat old man's girlfriend. After a confrontation, the door closed in King Ji's face, who didn't understand how he knew about her relationship with Lai Chuan, since they had always been discreet when renting rooms. Her friend didn't understand neither why she was not informed about these matters. Although Quinny claimed that it was not a serious relationship and that they had only rented rooms occasionally, the situation was still confusing to her. In the middle from such a chaotic situation, they did not have no choice but to return home and rethink their strategy, since she had made a mistake with Zioyan. On the other hand, King Ji was not going to stop, and she was determined to win the affection of Zioyan, considering that both are friends. The next day, Zioyan arrived with a construction team to rehabilitate a factory and wondered how long would the job take. Foreman explained that it would be necessary reinforce walls, build towers protection, install barbed wire, reinforce the armored steel doors, and add bulletproof glass. That would take time. The foreman also was wondering what kind of power there was offended Zioyan to need such security level. Zioyan warned him not to ask too many questions because knowing too much was not convenient. Our protagonist wanted to know if the construction could be completed in a month. The foreman responded that it would not be possible in that period, although many would be willing to try it. When mentioning that security and workers' welfare were important things, it surprised Zioyan, who thought the problem was just economic. Zioyan requested immediately the budget, which calculated that if he wanted to finish the project in a month, the workers would have to work tirelessly, which would involve a six-figure cost. The total price would be 20 million, and they requested an advance of 5 million to start immediately, but that option was not entirely convenient for our protagonist. He wanted the work started immediately and promised transfer money within a week. The construction company did not have to worry about payment, since if he did not do it, the land would become theirs. But suddenly in that Chuya arrived at the construction site. She defiantly hugged Zioyan's arm and asked him what he was doing here. Protagonist was tired of this woman that in his past life she and Kingi had excluded from the inheritance of his parents, and this time he was determined to make her pay more than anyone in the world. Her attempts were in vain. Although she tried to act nice, he could see her true nature, in that she asked if this is the land he had bought, and if he would build a large mansion, to which the protagonist immediately pushed her from his side and told her that what he decided to build here was none of her business. She couldn't understand what was happening from when that loser behaved way was so strange, since usually a simple touch of your arm, it was enough to make him blush and accelerate his pulse. But today nothing of that worked. The protagonist for his part moved away coldly and began to give instructions to workers on the mistakes they were making, pointing out that the door needed expand. Chuya, seeing the golden opportunity that was escaping from her, knew that Kingi had ruined everything with his maneuvers. She had to move and the land had to be hers. Zioyan returned to his home and began to think about how to get more money. After mortgaging his home to the bank, he only managed to get a loan of 3 million, a sum that was not enough even for the first phase of construction. However, he reflected that since the apocalypse it was imminent, to sell the house for about few people wouldn't be a big problem. It was something that had to be resolved soon. In that moment, the annoying old neighbor Grandpa Lee knocked on the door. The old man was a wealthy owner of both first floors of the building, and had tried unsuccessfully to buy the third Zioyan floor. In retaliation, he had been doing nasty things like paint doors, throw garbage, place coffins, and jam locks just to make him uncomfortable. Now he complained falsely that Xiaoyan had caused noise because a party the night before, when in actually the protagonist had gone to sleep early. Knowing that the old man wanted his house, Xiaoyan decided to sell him the property. The old man couldn't believe it, but Xiaoyan put forward a condition. He wanted to stay in the house for 6 months while he found a new place and had to immediately transfer 5 million to his account to cover the deposit of the new house. The old man accepted the condition but demanded a contract for avoid unexpected changes. Xiaoyan agreed and was determined that the old man would face the consequences during the apocalypse. With the transfer of 5 million and the loan from the bank, Xiaoyan raised a total of 8 million. Now it was the time to complete the following task and claim his reward. The largest supermarket was ideal for this mission. Xiaoyan began to stock up carefully with supplies for next year. People around him looked at him like if he was crazy, and they preferred to stay far away. But finally he headed to the cash line dragging a large number of supermarket carts. People around him didn't understand why Xiaoyan was buying so many things. They just laughed at him, considering him another gullible got carried away by rumors about the apocalypse and the end of the world. But the other people's opinions did not matter to him absolutely. The crucial thing was that Xiaoyan had completed the task assigned by the system and had earned 10 points. Among all the options in the store system supply box, it cost 10 points and Xiaoyan did not hesitate to spend all your points on it. The purchase was successful and received the mysterious box. When he opened it, he discovered a level 1 space ring that provided a subspace of 500 meters. In addition, time stopped within that space, which guaranteed that the stored items would not deteriorate. This was an extremely valuable acquisition, and with the new object he also received a new mission. He had to accumulate 10 years of provisions for accomplishing it. This mission offered a 20 points reward. However, at that time, the head of security of the supermarket made him an urgent call. That man called Yang Tao had received reports about a problematic client. The protagonist recognized this guy since Yang Tao had attended the same institute as Xiaoyan, and was known to be a local bully who bullied the weak and feared the strong. Immediately Yang Tao demanded that he return the items that he had bought, warning that it would not be understanding if he didn't do it. Xiaoyan responded that he was not going to return anything, pointing out that as a client he had the right to which he had paid, which Yang Tao insisted the protagonist pay for the articles immediately, threatening severe consequences if he didn't. After an hour of calculation determined that the total of the articles in the supermarket, it was 56,000 yuans. When Yang Tao demanded immediate payment, Xiaoyan did not hesitate to use her card credit to cover the amount by managing it with confidence. The transaction was completed without problems, surprising the boss of security. But before leaving, Xiaoyan asked Yang Tao to apologize publicly or otherwise he would return all items. Although Yang Tao thought that Xiaoyan was looking for problems, there were numerous witnesses who supported the protagonist and had seen the whole situation. The incident was recorded on video and Xiaoyan used the material as a threat, warning Yang Tao that he would make it viral on the internet if he didn't apologize. Also, Xiaoyan promised him that if the apology was genuine would be willing to do purchases in that place multiplied by 10, and told him that if he doubted his word he could bring the machine to show him his bank balance. When Yang Tao saw the 7 million in the account he could not believe it. Xiaoyan only demanded an apology to continue shopping. While the security chief struggled with his pride, however, the pressure was too much, and he ended up giving up and apologizing to him. Before leaving, Xiaoyan advised Yang Tao to be more cautious in the future since he never know how it can change situation. Then Yang Tao, with a false kindness attitude, asked why Xiaoyan was buying so many things, which he replied that it was not a matter of his, and that he was planning a big project. Yang Tao, understanding the opportunity, suggested that the articles in the supermarket warehouse were not enough for a big business and recommended Sank, a wholesaler with whom he was in contact, since he worked in the supermarket. So Yang Tao contacted Sang and told him he was delighted to report that he had found an important client. Xiaoyan realized that some people never change, and seeing that Yang Tao and Sang were still collaborating, he could only wonder how much they were ripping off the supermarket. Soon they arrived at the wholesale warehouse. A luxurious car approached with an air of superiority. When seeing the arrogant attitude by Sang, the protagonist noticed that probably he had never been deceived and decided correct that, although Sang did not recognize immediately Xiaoyan Jan Tao, he remembered that they had been companions in the secondary. After a moment, San remembered the protagonist as someone from character. Although he despised his simple clothes, he had hatred for those who feigned wealth without really having it. And upon seeing Xiaoyan's appearance, he assumed that he was not a person of importance, and got upset with Jiang Tao for introducing him to a client who considered insignificant. So without hesitation, he kicked as a reprimand for waste time with people who didn't matter. He was not willing to accept that possibility since with his vast experience in the world of business, thought he could identify rich people just by looking at them. After this, Xiaoyan offended him. This unleashed his anger, who confronted him demanding that repeat the offense, even if Xiaoyan didn't flinched and reiterated the insult. Realized that what really bothered Sand wasn't contempt, but the term illiterate. Jan Tao, when he saw that the tension increased, he intervened, telling Xiaoyan to not provoke more blood since Hai really hated being called that. However, by doing this, Jiang Tao received another kick and more insults from Sang, who was frustrated because he couldn't do what he wanted. So very enraged, he raised a choice, or bought a truck of goods or dragged on the ground, which the protagonist was pleased with the proposal, and he ordered Sang to drop his jacket and give him the account number. In a moment, the expression of anger in the Sang's face turned into amazement. Sang had transferred 1 million to his account, although it was only a deposit. Intention was to buy goods for a total value of 5 million. Immediately Sang asked what kind of products he needed, to which Xiaoyan responded that required oil, rice, salt, sacks, and beverages. In other words, products that could not deteriorate quickly. Sang, with a smile barely visible, saw in this an opportunity to get rid of a batch of food almost expired. Upon arrival at the warehouse with the cargo, Sang offered Xiaoyan to take all the merchandise with a 10% discount on wholesaler price. The offer seemed attractive. Xiaoyan soon suspected that Sang was willing to sell the food to a price so low without some trick, so decided to inspect the quality of the products and discovered that although they looked new, they were almost up to expiration date. Although he tried to offer a 50% off, Xiaoyan rejected the offer, preferring to use the 5 million to buy better quality food. They finally reached an agreement. Xiaoyan would buy almost expired food half price with deferred payment to a month. Sand couldn't believe what Xiaoyan was saying, since he told him that he was willing to mortgage his house to purchase almost expired food. But Sand did not understand why he needed those products, which this told him that very soon they would have a great value. But the protagonist, without going into more details, he asked Sand to send the merchandise to the address provided. At that time, he received a call about selling his house and quickly said bye to Sang and Yang Tao. The buyer was an old man named Mr. Hyan, who offered an advance of 400,000 and gave him 3 months to move. Although everything seemed to be going very well, Xiaoyan felt somewhat distrustful and asked the old man why he was in such a hurry, and he explained that his granddaughter was about changing schools and needed a new home, and the protagonist was the only one who was selling a house in neighborhood. The old man, by being so honest, provided all the information, which Xiaoyan asked if he was not afraid that could use that information to increase the price. The old man, realizing his mistake, he panicked and begged the protagonist not to do that since it was all he had saved. However, Xiaoyan was not one of those who would take advantage of the good faith of the people. He assured him that the deal would continue and then signed the contract. The old man was delighted because now his granddaughter would have a place to live. He was so polite and kind that even apologized to Xiaoyan for interrupting his work. Realizing how honest and kind the old man was, the protagonist thought that he and his granddaughter wouldn't last long. The apocalypse in that called the old man, who was already leaving, and asked for his address. Shortly after, the protagonist arrived at his land, where the construction was advancing at a good pace, informed the foreman that the payment would soon be done. He was interested in progress of the work. It turned out that almost the 80% of the construction was completed with reinforced walls and doors exactly as requested, and factory-based warehouse was ready to use, which was excellent news. So now he immediately called Sang and asked him to bring the supplies as soon as possible. So the warehouse was configured as a fortress for the apocalypse. began to fill with resources under the strict instructions from the protagonist. Everything was prepared for the afternoon when the workers left. Zioyan could finally evaluate the work done. Everything was according to plan and now could relax. At the same time, system sent a notification indicating that the protagonist had successfully completed the task, which gave him 20 points of the system. When opening system store, he found a box with skills unlocked and decided to buy it. When opening it, he received the ability Eye of the Mind level 1 that allowed him to detect hostility in others. Zioyan was satisfied since he considered that this skill would be very useful in first stages of the apocalypse. Also, the system gave the protagonist a new mission. He had to achieve a great number of weapons. However, this did not worry him since it was exactly what he had in mind. So he headed to the darkest area of the city to prepare for what was coming. And in a matter of seconds, the protagonist was in the bustling black market from the dark sector of the city, surrounded by transactions and noise. Suddenly, he ran into a man that seemed familiar to him. He was the Kingi lover. This man was trying to aggressively lower the price of some fake jewelry and finally got the seller to accept his offer. Zioyan did not expect to meet with him that night, but it wasn't surprising that this guy was interested in fake jade bracelets, since the Witch of Kingi was naive enough to be deceived by fake gifts. Some steps away found a store which offered some promising weapons. Sharp blades arranged in the ground, each one more deadly than the previous one. As soon as he saw those blades, a smile appeared on his face. He had finally found what he was looking for. That's how immediately he bowed in front of the salesman and asked without detour if he had something more forceful in his offer, which this guy who had military man appearance was not shown impressed by his question. He threw him a knife sharpener and told the protagonist to sharpen the blades if he needed something more robust. Adopting a more serious tone, Zioyan commented that none of those knives were sufficiently resistant and what he was looking for something much more solid. Realizing what that meant, this guy got extremely serious and he asked if he was looking for trouble. However, his irritation was soon interrupted by a notification on his phone since 200,000 yen just got transferred to his bank account. And in front of him was our protagonist holding the receipt after having sent the money through the QR code on the store. This was his way of calming the angry salesman and show that he was a serious buyer. Finally convinced, this guy called one of his assistants to guard the post while he was taking care of the real business. His attitude towards Zioyan changed radically and kindly led him to another building since we discuss outside could be uncomfortable, and they did not have problems accessing the building, seemingly harmless. Already being inside, that guy was now trying to offer him some weapons. Homemade ones for small white people cost 2,000 yen, and the ammunition would be economic. However, the protagonist rejected the proposal of this guy, who then showed imitation revolvers. The pistols were 5,000 yen each and bullets at 5 yuan. Although the offer was acceptable to Zioyan, he had advanced 200,000 yuan, but not he was interested in that kind of weaponry. Confused by this, he asked what he was looking for, which he explained to him that previous transfer was just a 10% advance payment of a total order of 2 million yen. Worried about the identity of the buyer, this guy raised questions. But Zioyan invented one story about how his subordinates handled these purchases and left clear that he did not appreciate inquiries about his identity. Given that the protagonist seemed serious, this man asked him to wait while he went to another room and locked the door. Looking through the window, he assured Zioyan that he had found the right contact, and he whispered to him that he would take care of the matter, and that he only needed one address to complete the transaction at midnight, and told him to bring the cash. When leaving the place, Zioyan noticed that this guy treated him almost like a VIP. However, he returned to the night market street just when he ran into Lai Chuan again, who commented on this unexpected meeting on the black market and realized why Zioyan had been spending so much lately. It also made him think in Kingi, and he supposed he had been receiving financial advice, and now he tried to sell everything to live well. But without worrying about the comments of that annoying individual, Zioyan thought to test his new ability by activating his mind's eye. A subtle aura illuminated his vision, observed a face indicator happy on the head of the guy who did it. He attended to whom we will call Mr. Weapons, and one with an angry face on the of Lai Chuan's. The skill turned out to be as useful as he expected. He decided to experiment a little more and commented negatively out loud about how he bought fake and second-hand products to deceive Kingji, and mentioned who also considered her to be a kind of second-hand garbage, so it made sense that she was worth so little. After listening to this, the anger indicator on the head of Lai Chuang escalated and started cursing towards him for touching a sensitive point. When they see the conflict, Mr. Weapons intervened and asked the protagonist if the fat man was causing trouble. This is how he marked Lai Chuan as an enemy, and taking the hint of the protagonist, the Mr. Weapons assured his new client that he and his team would be in charge of teaching a lesson to this chubby guy, which Zioyan was more than agree, but asked them not to give in since he had other plans for him in the future. When he saw that a group of bullies approached him, Lai Chuan immediately started to panic, tripping over his words and losing his arrogant attitude. Without losing more time, Mr. Weapons took out a baton and the thugs quickly took charge of the fat man, leaving him beaten and bruised in the middle of the road dark. His white suit was full of shoe prints and sea of kicks, and this incident only increased his hatred towards Zioyan. 2 days later in the warehouse, both parts arrived on time to finalize the agreement. Zioyan saw a truck full of suspicious boxes. They contained the weapons he had requested. With the arrival of weapons, he completed his mission to prepare for battle, obtaining 10 points from the system and increasing his total to 20. Among the boxes, a variety of weapons were found. In addition, the system gave him an extra prize, a physical enhancement potion +2, which turned out to be twice as much effective than the potions available in the store. With a smile filled with satisfaction, the protagonist injected himself the potion, expecting only a slight discomfort. However, the process turned out to be much more painful and unpleasant than he anticipated. As an average adult with a score physics of 5, an increase of +2 represented a 40% increase in his general capacity. Decided then review the system catalog and found another physical enhancement potion. After administering this second potion, his physical score was raised to 8, thus maximizing his strength. It was now approximately 60% stronger than an average person, and was anxious to check it by observing some iron bars scattered around Zioyan warehouse. Had the idea to try his new strength. He took one of the bars of iron used to reinforce buildings and threw it into the air. Then he kicked with all his might and speed, and immediately the bar bent significantly, and the boost made it hit the nearby wall, leaving a large dent in it. With his new strength, his bare hands now were practically weapons in themselves. He was ready to face an early apocalypse without problems. To prevent newly acquired weapons to be discovered, he stored them in his ring space to keep them safe. He simply pointed his magic ring into the truck, and the contents were absorbed immediately. According to its memories, the next day would mark the beginning of the apocalypse, so he had a lot of time to do every pending tasks. Despite everything, he could not get the image of an old man begging to be bought his house with a modest sum of money that he had gathered with effort for his granddaughter from his head. Despite having faced countless life or death situations and betrayal during the first apocalypse, he had always maintained his humanity and never ignored the misery of less fortunate, and thought that maybe he should send some supplies, essentials to the old man. It was the minimum could do to help and improve the chances of survival of his granddaughter. As part of his plan for apocalypse, the protagonist decided to refund to the elder for the funds provided. The next day he went to a ruined apartment building in a prime area of another city. Without the help of a GPS, it would have been impossible to locate this hidden place and how deteriorated it was. The old man had been renting in this old and cheap building without elevator, what indicated that he was not in the best economic situation. Upon arrival, Zioyan knew that he had to take out the supplies, his ring storage, to avoid complications when explaining its origin. He activated the ring and the hall was filled of boxes stacked to the edge. When the old man opened the door, initially he thought Zioyan was the landlord promising to pay the rent. However, upon seeing it better and seeing the boxes overflowing the hallway and spreading down the stairs, his confusion increased more. But the protagonist promised him an explanation later, while they rushed to put the boxes in before the neighbors would notice it. After a few minutes of work mainly made by Zioyan, all boxes were inside. The old man was surprised by seeing that Zioyan didn't seem fatigued, not at all. Even though he had done a lot of effort in that, the protagonist inspected the room and concluded that would be a suitable emergency escape due to the robustness of the main door. then instructed the elder to use supplies with caution since they should last approximately 6 months. Just when he was about to go into more details, Xiaoyan noticed a photo in the room that surprised him. In the photo, the old man appeared proud with his beautiful granddaughter. For Xiaoyan's surprise, the girl in the picture was a close friend of his during the first apocalypse called Chan Chan. So he immediately asked the old man if the young woman in the photo was called Chan Chan, which confused the old man even more since he had never mentioned her name. Xiaoyan's expression turned gloomy while urgently asking the old man where the girl was, which he replied that she was still at school. While they were fixing the document transfer, Xiaoyan remembered how Chan Chan had expressed her regret for having put her grandfather in a difficult situation during the first days of the first apocalypse. According to what he remembered, Chan's grandfather had risked everything to save her. In that desolate timeline, old man had ventured bravely in her school infested with zombies to save her. And although he managed rescuing her, he died in the process. Being a close ally from his previous life, Xiaoyan was determined to prevent that Chanchan would face similar suffering again. So he turned to the old man and informed him that the house was no longer for sale. The worried old man thought that Xiaoyan was retracting the agreement, but what followed was even more surprising. Xiaoyan explained to him that the world would become in true chaos the next day. Chan Chan's school would no longer be relevant, but it was urgent to move her to a safer place. This sudden statement left the old man even more confused, which the protagonist pressed for time. He did not consider how difficult it would be for an old man to understand the apocalypse. Therefore, he used a simpler analogy comparing the situation with a famine to give an idea of the severity of the problem. Although the idea of a famine was alarmingly, the old man thought that such things don't happen in times of peace. Given that words didn't seem enough to convince old man, Xiaoyan decided to show him instead just talk, so he saved all the boxes and objects in his ring storage, leaving room empty and spacious, a change that the old man found amazing. Xiaoyan stated to have special abilities and the ability to foresee the future and asked to the old man to trust him to be able to save Chanchan. The next step was take the girl out of school. While they were heading towards the place where Chanchan was, the old man looked astonished at how Xiaoyan was driving recklessly, trying to get there as quickly as possible. When they arrived, they found Chanchan in front of an apartment building surrounded from other students. Some jealous girls were hitting her because a boy had been interested in her. Even though Chanchan insisted that he didn't want to be with him, and that he simply enjoyed attention, one of the girls gave him a kick in the stomach for defending herself, and they all took turns to attack her, envious of the attention that Chanchan received for her beauty. The situation was escalating rapidly when the old man's voice broke the chaos. Seeing his granddaughter in such a distressing situation, all of them diverted their attention towards the grandfather who was running towards his beloved granddaughter. The old man shouted at the young girls out of control, demanding that they release Chanchan. But at that moment, a group of thugs, unattractive, got in the way, ordering the old man to set aside so the girls could resolve the matter without interruptions. The thugs showed off their weapons and knives in an intimidating way, but the old man rushed towards them despite the threats, recriminating against the thugs for their behavior. But immediately one of these raised his bat of steel, pointing it at the old man's head. But Xiaoyan intervened just in time, stopping the attack of this subject, and immediately looked at him with an overwhelming look, noticing that they were still learning the trade. Quickly, two other guys focused on Xiaoyan, thinking maybe he was the older brother of Chanchan or something like that, which made him an easy target. But the thug holding the bat failed to move it no matter how hard he tried. And without wasting time, he gave him a precise kick in the entire mouth of the stomach, sending it into the air like if it had been fired from a cannon. Seeing what had happened to the first, the other two hesitated for a moment. At first glance, Xiaoyan seemed to have combat training and mentioned that maybe if they attacked as a team they could hit him, but the cold look of a calculator Xiaoyan indicated that the plan was gonna fail. The plan of the thugs consisted of one with a knife in front, and the other with a bat behind him. The first to attack was the one wearing the bat, who jumped quickly, but the protagonist dodged the attack with ease, his new body proving to be agile. After improving his physical skills with potions, his reaction speed had also increased. So with his new force caught the thug who tried hit him, and threw him to the ground without effort. A single blow was enough for this guy was probably going to faint from hitting his head on the pavement. Meanwhile, the remaining man he tried to attack aggressively, but Zioyan deflected the weapon without flinching, and she looked at him with determination. Keeping the eye contact, he prepared his leg and gave a strong blow to the side of the leg, leaving him bent like a tortilla. The fall ended with the blonde guy hitting the ground hard, and in seconds all of them were defeated. The only remaining problems were the girls who tormented Chan Chan without reason. As a defender of equality after his experience in the apocalypse, he slapped one of them, surprising the chick with a slap so strong that it made her tremble and the cheek turned red. As for the other bully, as she liked to shoot so much of Chan Chan's hair, Zioyan gave to this woman a little of her own medicine, and he didn't let her go no matter how much she begged. With a murderous look, he took out his knife that he had gotten from Blonde, and he put it against the girl's neck. Scared of what she might do, she could not do anything but crying. Every spectator in the area heard a sharp cut and a scream heartbreaking. Yet Zioyan didn't even blink. At the first apocalypse he did many things for him well of survival, and those instincts remain with him. The ladies looked horrified at the result of what he had just done. The girl fell on her knees since the protagonist had cut her hair and humiliated her in front of all. But still, without learning the lesson, this woman screamed that she would not let Zioyan would get his way after having treated her that way. However, he did not pay attention to her empty threats as he looked at her with contempt and immediately spread the strands of hair on his head, further lack of respect, and told her that he had done a favor. Since the hair long, it would only be a burden on the apocalypse. Everyone was confused for his mysterious words, but he told them assured that having short hair could save his life in the next few days. But leaving that aside, he turned to Chan Chan with familiarity, telling her that they had to go now, although she didn't know where. Despite of all things, the old man convinced his granddaughter so that she could get into the car at the parking lot immediately. Already being in the car, her grandfather told her that she would not return to the school. With a crazy look in the eyes, the old man explained that a great famine was looming and survival had to be her priority. But Chan Chan didn't believe him. She thought that her grandfather had simply fallen into one of those scam calls. Zioyan looked at the two arguing, while the young woman was worried that his grandfather had just been scammed for some money. But the protagonist was relieved to see Chan Chan safe and promised to protect her in her new life. By noticing that his grandfather's words had no meaning effect, he intervened and confessed that the information about the famine had been invented by him. And this is how Zioyan was formally introduced, allowing Chan Chan would call him Brother Zioyan. She thanked him for facing the bullies at school, and he promised her that those guys wouldn't last much. She wondered if the famine was real, to which the prod admitted that only he invented it to convince his grandfather. Then he clarified that what really was approaching is the apocalypse, the end of the modern civilization. When listening to such an extreme statement, Zioyan thought that it was natural to be called crazy. She decided to check the news and the internet in searching for signs of the end of the world. When she took out her phone, she saw a video first shot of a man detained by the authorities at a train station reciting prophecies and about the end of days. However, Zioyan assured him that they should be except for now. But even if the zombies couldn't take over everything during a few days, the possibility of a small nearby outbreak was not impossible. While traffic was suddenly stopped in that a luxury car used the lane emergency to get ahead of everyone and resume movement, cut off abruptly towards Zioyan, who had to brake to avoid a crash. The protagonist, he was furious because the driver reckless did not respect the signs, twist and endangered everyone by using the emergency lane so irresponsible. Both vehicles were stuck in the same traffic jam, and the driver of the luxury car, instead to calm down, he stopped by the window of Zioyan and began to curse him, very furious. At that, the old man suggested avoiding reckless driver problems who seemed wealthy and powerful, but Zioyan was unwilling to give in. For almost an hour in traffic, Zioyan was determined to face the driver if he caused more problems. When the traffic finally cleared, the luxury car was trying to overtake again, indicating that the problems were not finished yet, and he was deliberately pursuing them. The protagonist was really starting to get angry now, since this rich brat, he just wouldn't let him go. This guy was surely a person uncontrolled that put their life at risk, life and his vehicle, just to be annoying on the road. He was bothering them, deliberately provoking them. The old man insisted to the protagonist just let it go and not get involved more. Sincerely, the Zioyan from the past, he could have let past that guy, but the apocalypse is tomorrow. There would no longer be a need to tolerate trash like that rich brat. So the protagonist played with the aggressive driver a little. When listening this, Chan understood that Zioyan allowed other survivors die outside with the zombies. However, the protagonist did not respond directly, but took them to another place. He explained that with the apocalypse the human nature would become even more unpredictable and evil in people magnify without laws. Warned that the compassion could lead them to be murdered and showed them a place that had built to protect themselves. It seemed a gated apartment complex with multiple cargo containers scattered around, and he indicated to them that in case he was not present and the survivors came looking, help could be accommodated in this area buffer as temporary shelter. But he made it clear that the prohibition of other people in the main fortress still standing without its permission, which the old man agreed with him. The next stop of the tour would be the food storage. He would also show them which areas of their supply location could be rationed to other people. Upon entering the warehouse full of piles and piles of essential supplies seemed like an absurd vision, and that Zioyan turned around looking at them with intention. He proceeded to activate the mind's eye to check their hostility status, which did not show any signs of malice. After showing them the goods, fortunately he saw happy faces on their heads, so they thought it should be safe to assume that this was a sign of confidence. So he continued with the next display from his ring storage. While explaining that weapons were the most important thing in this apocalypse, gave Chanchan a crossbow and the old man a shotgun. Reminded the importance of maintaining the control over these weapons and prevent them falling into the wrong hands. It was a matter of common sense. To ensure gun safety was crucial to avoid chaos. But suddenly in that Zioyan received a notification of the system on a new task. After meeting with Chan, he was assigned another mission. Now he had to find an old acquaintance called Sanchai. This news surprised him, who at the look at the city from the terrace observation saw an arrow that marked the location of Sanchai. Given that he already planned to meet old friends, this seemed like an excellent opportunity. But before leaving to fulfill his mission, he reminded the grandfather and the granddaughter who had to follow the rules and do not consider breaking them. When they asked him where he was going, he got into his car and explained that he was going to recruit and form a great team. The arrow indicating the location of Sanchai seemed to point to a bar called KTV, which within its facilities a group of friends were enjoying drinking and singing karaoke on it. Sanchai somewhat staggeringly came out of the room with a friend to go to the bathroom. After doing his morning needs, they both staggered out of the hallway to continue enjoying the party. Sanchai was so drunk that accidentally collided with a girl she seemed quite upset. Although this apologized for this, the bodyguard of the girl called him a fool and attacked him without doubt, which made Sanchai crashed against the wall and his friend concerned about his condition. He approached quickly to him to see how he was, and immediately the friend of Sanchai confronted the bully, demanding that stop being violent. Bothered by the confrontation, especially in front of the girl, that guy got angry and he lifted Sanchai's friend by the neck with great strength. Seeing that the situation was getting dangerous, Sanchai tried get up. He admitted his mistake and asked the bully not to hurt his friend, but fortunately a member of staff of the establishment, still recovering from a cold, noticed the fight. Since the fights were common in the bar due to the drunk customers, decided to intervene to calm things down and asked both groups to calm down. However, the bully, offended by the interruption, he considered this a lack of respect. That not even the owner of the establishment would dare to touch his clothes, and now the brave employee became the target of the wrath of that guy, and without hesitation he did a gesture to Sanchai and his friend to leave quickly. On that he demanded the immediate presence of the chief del bar and threatened to close the place, and even though this employee tried softening the situation, had no success. While the boys of the university, they ran back to the karaoke room 3D90 as if they were fleeing from a wild animal. In that his friends, logically curious about what had happened, they were worried about their conditions, had basically had a confrontation with a drunken thug who had threatened them. And they began to tell that they were lucky that one of employees will act quickly to calm the situation. One of his friends suggested that they should have fought, arguing that his engineering class mechanics should never give up. He wanted to call other colleagues of his department to take retaliation, but immediately Sanchai stopped him, arguing that acting impulsively and look for problems less than a year after graduating would be a very stupid decision, and mentioned that they should keep singing, dancing and celebrating. But suddenly in that the drunk thug appeared with all his group to seek retaliation. Seemed that they had beaten the employee fined room 3090. The boys were naturally gone that a group of unknown thugs had just break into their private room. But immediately the drunken thug threw the used as a rag doll, and he pointed to Sanchai and his friends, telling his men to grab them all. The kids at the university didn't dare to resist for fear that the violence will escalate even more, so they gave up without any other options. Seeing the fate of the beaten employee made them shudder, thinking that also they would end that way. But in that mechanical engineering bully challenged the bullies, challenging them to let him make a call. But that bully took a bottle and broke it on his head, so his blood mixed with the alcohol while falling to the ground. This worried Sanchai a lot. Meanwhile, outside the Barsha On arrived in his car, and he was excited to reunite with an old friend from the first apocalypse. He was amused of how this place looked like the university version of Sanchai. But without more time entered the received place by the staff, remembering how despite from the chaos of the world, his friend always had maintained his passion for singing. Meanwhile, inside the local, Sanchai sees how his friend is lying on the floor after being hit by a bottle in the head. The bully asks his girlfriend if after what he has done to her she feels satisfied, and tells him that she may not be completely, because it was not him who stumbled upon her, but who was Sanchai. So the bully points to him to proceed to hurt him too. But Chen gets up from the ground very furious and grabs the ashtray to attack it response for having hurt him. Nevertheless, he is stopped by two of the henchmen who hold him by the arms. The leader of the thugs approaches and displeased. He tells him that he didn't think that had enough guts to do that. And immediately he breaks a glass bottle on the head, leaving him completely knocked out in the ground. In that, Sanchai and his friend who observed the whole situation decided to come to blows with the bullies, except for one of them who is cornered in a corner very scared. The group of bad guys decide to beat them to death for reveal and talk back. But in complete chaos, the karaoke employee get up from the ground and start coughing. Observe the fight that has formed, but strangely his eyes have turned red and has a distinct appearance. In that, quickly pounces and bites one of the bullies right on the shoulder. He asks him if he has a complex dog and asks his friends for help so that they can get rid of him. In the middle of the panic, one of the other bullies decides to try to take it off, but he can't, and wonders how he is so strong. Then the employee turns around and proceeds to also bite him on the arm, throwing him to the floor while reconfirming that he has an inhuman strength. In that, it arrives our protagonist, who holds the wild employee from neck and with hardly any effort smashes his head against the television, ordering everyone in the room to stop fighting. Everyone are surprised so much that the bully that was bitten on the arm is shocked by his great strength when seeing how a young man carry the neck with one hand. The leader of the bullies asks the protagonist who is him, but he ignores him, and he asks his friend Sanchai if it has been bitten, to which he says no. After hearing this, Zioyan asks him to go with him, but again the bully leader held by the shoulder, recriminating that they have not finished settling the score. In that, he sees that one of his henchmen is coughing on the floor, telling him that his head is spinning, and he feels very dizzy, to what he asks if perhaps his cold has worsened. In that, Zioyan gets to looking at his shoulder, realizing that he has a bite. So he asks if he has been bitten by the employee, and he claims that this was the case. He quickly realizes that, judging for what he says, it was most likely he was already infected, and even worse, with a bite so close to the brain, will be matter of time before soon be transformed. The protagonist, who has still holding on to the infected employee, pull into a room and closes the door, because luckily the zombies are so fools that still don't know how to open doors. After this, he asks directly to Sanchai whoever he wants him to send to God for him, and Confusef he asks if they know each other. Then the leader of the bullies gets upset because he wants to sound arrogant and decides to go hit him, but Zioyan held him quickly from the face and with an incredible force stamps his head against the ground. On the other side, one arrives of his henchmen to try to attack him, but the protagonist ends up getting rid of him with a good blow to the face. He knocked out instant. The last remaining henchman approaches his partner because he cannot believe that in one fell swoop he knocked him out. In that, Zioyan asks everyone if there is anyone else who is not convinced of his strength come and test his fists. Then orders Sanchai to take his friend with him and wait outside. Then the group of friends leaves the karaoke room, and behind them also the group of bullies. But the protagonist stands in front of them, hindering him, and tells the leader of the group, who has gotten drunk so much so that he forgot his own name and almost causes his friend to be killed. This one doesn't knows what he is talking about and asks him to get out of his way, but Stay pushes and decides to lock them up with his group inside the room. Finally, one of his henchmen who was bitten turns into a zombie and proceeds to bite him. On that, another employee of the karaoke arrives on the scene and asks the protagonist what is happening and if needs help. To what he tells him lock this door immediately because no one is allowed enter. After him contacting the police and to the hospital and tell them that there is a patient with rabies in the room. The employee, when hearing this, he finds somewhat confused, but the protagonist yells at him to do it. While they leave the place, the employee is intrigued by what there is inside, because there is a lot of noise. One of his companions arrive and ask him why the commotion. He explains to that one of the customers said that there is someone with rabies inside the room, so that to kill their curiosity the two decide to go check the security cameras. So once he gets back to the fortress he will redeem them all. However, there is still a problem. At that moment the protagonist remember how in his past life Sanchai's roommate betrayed him, causing many others died at the hands of zombies, and Sanchai was the only one who could barely survive such an incident, being seen as the culprit that everyone has died. This is why our protagonist asks who of the three boys that are with him in the car could be the real betrayer. Changing scene, Kingi finds herself calling her lover asking him when he will bring the supplies that he promised because the things are turning very dangerous outside, and she is too afraid to go out shop on her own. To what he tells her that will soon take them, but right now has to deal with something quickly. In that moment she hears how someone knocks. The door is very loud, so she tells him that he's going to hang up to see who it is. So she proceeds to check through the peephole, and it's her friend Chuya. She notifies her that grandfather Liu of the first floor was moved to another location during the morning. Apparently a car police and an ambulance took him away suddenly. Kingi thinks that that explains why there was so much fuss in the morning. On the other hand, Chuya comments apparently the rabies of that everyone is talking. It's not just one tactic to scare people. So who asks if Li Chang has done the delivery of the supplies that he promised. However, she tells her that he hasn't done it yet, to what she complains that one cannot trust men. That was funny coming from them, lol. In that she mentions that Zioyan has a large reserve of supplies which is more than enough to make a fortune during the epidemic. In that Kingila asks how she knows about this information. To which she replies that last time when she was kicked out of the property Zioyan sent one of his lackeys to spy on him secretly, revealing that there is trucks that regularly deliver supplies to the abandoned factory that has under his ownership. So they deduce that it is most likely that he already has been aware of the epidemic since much earlier. In that Chuya tells her here is nothing wrong because Lichuan already knew about that too, so she tells Kinji to trust her and call him so that do the business as soon as possible and take advantage of getting a better supply gain. Back to Zioyan. Once they arrive at the shelter, they get out of the car and Sanchai with a surprised attitude thinks that the place is quite incredible because it seems like a fortress, to which the protagonist answers that in fact that is it's something everyone says the first time they see it. Suddenly the grandfather comes to see him and Chanchan receive them, and the protagonist proceeds to introduce the new members of the team who will accompany them from now on onwards. After doing the formalities, he asks the grandfather to take the kids and show them the surroundings of the place, in addition to explain the rules and regulations to them that they must follow. In that, one of the friends, whose name is Jimin, asks Zioyan to give them some weapons since with that they can help defend the place too. However, one of his companions, realizing his imprudence, tells him that don't be so impatient to ask for something like that because they have just moved to place and need to earn their trust first. But Zioyan calmly says that after a few days they will receive their own weapons, so no, there is reason to despair. For now the priority would be to check on his other friend who is seriously injured and must be taken to the medical room. After a little while, the group of boys is already installed in the shelter and feel very comfortable with the stay. But in that, Jimin asks his fourth friend why he got into his previous proposal, since if not he would have done for sure he could have got weapons to defend themselves. Additionally, he believes that given the current situation, at best cases could be being protected of the imminent apocalypse, or at worst of the cases they would now be kidnapped in the house. In that, the fourth looks at him disapprovingly, arguing that don't express yourself that way to someone who had just saved them from a beating. At that, Jimin asks what information relevant they have of him now. To what Sanchai responds, making him remember that the protagonist had mentioned in the car that someone hired him to save them. However, Jimin seems not yet be satisfied with the situation, begins to notice something insecure, and tells them that that story about who hired him surely was a complete farce, so he doubt he's even telling them the true story. Furthermore, he is not sure of how they are treating Chan, indicating that the fourth doctor they sent him to, it looks like a prison, and they could even be taking out his organs there. So with a determined look suggests that attack first. In that, fourth thinks that they could also make a severe mistake if they come to a conclusion like that, because that would mean they would be betraying the person who saved them. However, Jimin with a determined look tells him he'd rather betray the world than let the world betray him. So even if Zioyan tells the truth, they will take control of the fortress, his account, and establish his leadership. Then, with some malice in his voice, think that besides Zioyan there is only an old man and a young girl in the place. So while the protagonist is away, they could take advantage to capture to the old man and his granddaughter. Are then comments that she, referring to Chan Chan, is a girl who looks very attractive, and maybe they could do something about it by leaving glimpse a disturbing aura. This makes Mei Sanchai and fourth be perplexed for his words and uncomfortable for what he just hinted. But Jimin breaks it atmosphere, laughing and telling them to relax because he was just joking with them. Sanchai suddenly sighs, commenting that what he heard was a scare and that the apocalypse had not even started, and he was already thinking about perverse and illegal things. After the two friends leave, Jimin looks at them with a somewhat cynical look. While thinking that in chaotic times one must be someone without mercy, and ensures that once his plans have success will turn his two friends into lackeys of his evil desires. While both grandfather and Chanchan approach the protagonist with the objective to let him know that their friends have already been treated and guided to their rooms, and that the one who was badly hurt is already resting in the medical room, is like this how the plot thanks him for having done of everything as it was ordered, and asks them to take what they deserved, rest, because who knows what could happen tomorrow. But before they leave, quickly reminds them to keep one eye on the two companions Sanchai, since he has a feeling that there is a traitor hidden among them. Already at night, Zioyan finds himself alone in the shelter's warehouses and proceeds to review store items, specifically the boxes he got during the missions. Without further delay, starts to open them at the same time, and a big booty appears in front of his eyes. This makes him think that these rewards look pretty decent. However, it is not as good as spending money freely nowadays. So once the apocalypse begins and the world's resources go little by little reducing these boxes, they will obtain a really high value. The night has already passed, and the next day the sound of several cars rumble throughout the environment, specifically 3 cars which are positioned right at the entrance of the refuge of our protagonist. In that, the guy who had a problem with Zioyan gets off on the road that other day, because he had been very upset and resentful for having messed with him. Next to him are numerous bandits who have probably hired, and orders them to start force entry into someone's house very aggressively way. When they see that it is very difficult to open, one of the bullies comments to him that it seems that said door is made of a very material strong and thick. So with weapons who do not believe it is possible force it to open up. On that, the boss who hired them begins to diminish his patience and quickly order that bring the heavy armory. Suddenly one of them takes out a trunk full of Molotov bottles, and at that everyone begins to throw them into the house beyond the metal door and setting the place on fire. In the face of the fire and chaos that was taking place, Chan and the others come out together with Sanchai and the boys to go quickly to extinguish the fire. That's what she thinks, that the protagonist was right, that the apocalypse hasn't even started properly and already numerous things extremes are happening. On the other hand, Zioyan and grandfather, equipped with rifles, go up to the viewpoint of the refuge to review who are the ones are looking for trouble. Once they are upstairs, the grandfather quickly realizes which is about the subject with which Zioyan had an altercation in the road on that under one of the thugs realizes that they are being watched and he notifies the boss. But with a voice arrogant and aggressive, insults him telling him to get off and show his face or else it will burn all the house. Zioyan looks at him very seriously and warns him and his henchmen to leave the place or else something bad will happen to them. Then the entire group of bullies, when they hear the threat, they get very hysterical and order to bring another trunk full of Molotov to continue with the attack. In that appears new system notification indicating that a new mission has been suddenly supplied. Then the grandfather, who feels a little nervous, asks him if they should shoot in the air as a sign of warning, but the protagonist seems not be comfortable with this since the new mission that has been entrusted to you is nothing more and nothing less than to eliminate every possible threat and protect the Helter like at any price. That's why with a calm voice he tells grandfather then a few simple warning shots will be of no use, because those people are clearly thugs of society, so much so that he didn't thought twice and caused a fire in the place without caring if innocent people could die. This way, pointing his rifle, he makes it clear to the grandpa that letting these scumbags alive during the apocalypse only will bring problems in the future and even harming innocent people. Without think twice, pull the trigger from the rifle, and with one shot he blows up brutally the arm to the leader of the bullies, making him scream in pain and scaring everyone on the spot, which Zioyan thinks that he failed his shot, because apparently he had planned to hit other side, and that having lived some months peacefully has made him rust a little. The boss and all his lackeys quickly decide to leave the place because they did not foresee that the protagonist had weapons, but they could be heard with a cold and ruthless attitude tells them that hates people who never finish what they start, and without thinking twice with one squeeze of the trigger discharge numerous shots fired at them, brutally eliminating them. In that the boss, frightened, manages to get on the vehicle and asks them to quickly step on the accelerator to lengthen place. However, Zioyan already had anticipated this and changes his weapon to an automatic rifle, then discharges a series of bullets with such speed and precision that leaves Grandpa totally impressed. Once all the bullies have been eliminated, the protagonist orders the Grandpa to call Sanchai and the others to go clean the place. But then he decides to change his mind, believe they are still in the early days stages of the apocalypse, and believes that it is better to let the corpses turn into zombies, in this way use them as training for Sanchai and the others. Meanwhile, Lichang is in his car and asks Chuya if they are already close to the refuge of Zioyan. She tells him with a very loving attitude that they are about to get there. Kingji notices how her friend acts in front of Lichuan, making him see that always behaves like this with him and leaving guess that he wants to compete because take away his lover. Once they reach the place, Kingji tells her friend that accompany her, but she doesn't seem to feel like it. So she ends up forcing her out of the car and ordering her to stop making excuses and complaints. Then Lichuan notifies the bandits he hired to be alert to loot once he give them the signal. While the two girls walk while talking, they realize that ahead something happened suddenly. They stay impressed to see that the road to the entrance is full of corpses. This makes them think that other thugs have already come to loot the Zioyan's supplies, and with attitude contemptuously believe that it is most likely that he too is already dead. But while the two take out their conclusions, behind one of the bodies turning into a zombie observes them with threatens. Once the two girls arrive at the door and realize that it is made of strong steel which do not allow them to see absolutely nothing. Soon Chan, who is observing from the viewpoint, requires them to tell her who they are and were able to find the place. In that they tell them that they are known to the protagonist, and Kingi mentions that she is his girlfriend. Then Chanchan immediately notifies Zioyan the message, but Kingji can't help but feel upset upon finding out how he has a new girlfriend, and Chuya, when seeing her like that way, tells her not to show any sign of being upset and concentrate in the mission. She also mentions that Chan has a crossbow, so she asks if Lichuan will be able to beat them. But Kingi, who was still somewhat bothered, tells her not to worry since he brought a few firearms, so once there is the door they can be capable of eliminating the protagonist. In that Zio arrives and asks them what they are doing at his home, and without thinking about it twice activates his mind's eye to check the mood of both. This allows him to realize that despite that the two are pretending to be friendly people, deep down are furious, and they bring bad intentions. Zioyan tells them he doubt they are there to care why the scum of Lichuan must be somewhere hidden, so orders them to tell them how many thugs brought and what weapons they brought. Soon the two girls are impressed because they had not planned that he knew about something like that and acted, followed by a series of shots that grate very close to them coming from Zioyan, who with a cold and calculating look has opened fire on them. Before the shock, Chuya tells her friend that stop provoking him because it loads guns, but Kinji, somewhat furious, tells him that he has no reason to fear because he has fire weapons. But she doesn't think the protagonist has the guts to eliminate her. In that case, with a confident smile, clarifies that he does not have intention to get rid of them in a way as fast as that, since it seems like it's an easy death. All of a sudden, both of them turn around and realize that at their behind you a horde of zombies have come to quickly to eat them. The face of Zioyan turns between a mixture of pleasure and revenge, telling them what he wants: let them die slowly under the clutches of the zombies. In the middle of the panic, the two girls start running away from the place, running with all their strength not to be devoured. And in full despair, Kingi yells at Lichuan to save her. But as he finishes these words, someone is right at his door cocking loudly, so he tells his wife to stay in silence, grabbing a golf club and heading to open the door. This one, listening to the voice, he realizes that it's about his partner Yantao, so he calms for a moment. But suddenly, when opening the door, he receives a hard kick in the stomach that knocks him down, and immediately his men proceed to seize him. Visibly desperate, asks him to order his men to let him go and asks him what he's up to since he's tried him well. But Yantao says that it doesn't seem he treated him well, since in his eyes he sees him as just another lackey. In addition, he emphasizes that he have a little conscience, since if it weren't for him he would never be have been able to save for buying that house that he has. Yantao complains that he made little money for the houses while San earned a lot from the sale of other properties. So now, after so much chatter, he demands him with a threatening tone to give him the deposit keys as well as the address of the place. But he did not respond, as a sign that he is resisting, so Yantao, so cruel, goes to his wife and holds her strongly of hair, hurting her. So his son gets angry and tells him that he let her go by biting Yantao's arm. But he, in a ruthless act, gives her a slap that sends the child to the floor. Then San tells him that if he has so many guts, come towards him, but let him his wife and son calm. Along that, Yantao tells him that there is no problem because as soon as he decides cooperate, both his wife and his son will be safe. With nothing more to do, San takes him and his men towards the supply depot. But Yantao, somewhat doubtful, asks if these are the only supply boxes that remain. In that, Sang answers that he was the one who found those great clients before, and that is why almost all supplies are already sold. Even the food that is about to expire, it's almost finished. This makes Yantao think about Zioyan because he was the one responsible for having purchased many boxes before, so he gets the idea that if they go and loot the supplies he has stored in his factory, then they would have reserves for all their life. However, Sand warns that he better stay away from him because the other day when he was making some orders he realized that he was carrying a gun. So somehow he has been able to break through during all the chaos in the city, and now he has a lot of advantage. But Yantao tells him that is not a problem since he will be the one who has to deal with him. Before this, Sank is intrigued and asks what he means. To what Yantao orders him that he will be the one in charge of stealing Zioyan's supplies because only then can he have returned his wife and son safely, blackmailing him. Changing scene, the protagonist and the other boys are in the doctor's room watching the Chan's serious condition, who has already mutated almost into a zombie and is roaring like crazy. At the shock, Jimin, without any remorse, tells the protagonist to eliminate him. But this one keeps looking at him silently. In that, Sanchai, who is affected, asks him what is he saying. But Jimin, still clinging to the idea that he already is practically dead and of no taking care of getting rid of him, now he could somehow free himself and put everyone's life at risk. In that, Zioyan reproaches that it is a friend almost like his brother, and they can't just give up and let it die without even try something. However, the protagonist intervenes, saying that Jimin is right because once he becomes a zombie there are practically none possibility of recovery. Then he takes out a knife from his pocket and gives it to Jimin, telling him to use it. This is a little nervous and comments why is giving, but the protagonist tells him just use it to eliminate to his friend Chan, claiming that he always wanted a weapon. So now he must use it to put an end to the misery and suffering of his companion. However, in the midst of this, it approaches Sanchai, and he told him towards own that he better give the weapon to him because he is going to take care of doing that. So in response to the request from Sanchai, the protagonist asks him if he is sure he can do this, and asks what would happen if he were lying, since once he kill him would then turn him into a murderer. However, Sanchai tells him that it doesn't matter, because he fully trusts the protagonist. So Xiaoyan with a smile on his face tells him to go then and do it. This is how Sanchai approaches, a bit nervous about having to do something like this, but he has enough guts, and without thinking much he decides to nail the knife and finish everything at once. However, the protagonist holds his arm just before he finishes him, telling him that for this occasion go from that place since his case is special and still has something to do with him. All this while having a notification of the issue about which a rare mutation variant has been discovered. Once all the boys leave the room, the protagonist stays looking at Chan, already mutated into a zombie, and says that he has an important task for him. Changing scene, Sank finds himself driving frantically until he reaches the refuge of the protagonist, in that a zombie approaches him to attack him, and with great speed manages to bite him on his left arm. In the midst of despair, he pushes him and runs to his car to grab the golf club and remove it, giving it several blows until it is ground already deaf. Then he says that this place is a complete chaos, and that should not be neglected, while he keeps sneaking around the area. For another side, the protagonist is next to his group, leaving the fortress armed and equipped, in that Chan tells him that with all the things she has wearing and equipment on her body, she feels somewhat uncomfortable and slow. But he emphasizes that zombies have no type of rationality, and that energy and explosive force is more powerful than that of a regular human, which makes them quite dangerous. Also, given the combat skills that she has now, tells him that it would be better before she is injured, better use equipment that protect her body, because once she gains more combat experience she can remove it to feel more light. After this, warns everyone to get ready, because now they are within the range of perception of zombies, in that a zombie he already realizes their presence and approaches to attack them. Suddenly he reminds them what he told them and watch each other's backs, as well as keeping distance. All this while avoiding the zombie to be able to use it as an example and teach them. He mentions that the moment when the zombie attack is dodged satisfactorily, that is the moment perfect to be able to attack. Then Shiokan proceeds to attack the zombie, but ends up hitting the part center of his skull, making echoes throughout his arm and causes pain. The protagonist tells everyone what the skull is the hardest and most massive part of the head, in addition to not receiving as much damage because it will only cause hurt in the hands, pointing out that what he just did is the example perfect what not to do. Then the zombie rushes forward him with force, but he manages to block it successfully with the machete while asking for help, so that someone save him. However, the protagonist, who is acting as a teacher, praises the good defense and reaction of Xiaokai, and then asks Sanchai to act and save his comrade. This one with great speed is positioned in the part back of the zombie, and with his bat delivers a strong blow to the neck which leaves it on the floor. And that's how everyone takes the opportunity to attack him together. After having defeated him satisfactorily, Sanchai turns around towards Xiaoyan to ask her how it is they did it this time. But they quickly realizes that there is a zombie behind about to attack him. At that moment, Xiaoyan, without flinching one bit, holds easily from the face while he continues to teach him lessons to their partners to not to forget that he told them never. But for nothing world can let their guard down when they try to observe the surroundings. This great skill and experience of our protagonist leaves the entire group impressed because of how skilled and confident he is in this type of situations. On the other hand, Sangha is still hanging around the area, and seeing the large number of zombies that there is, he is wondering if they are still alive. Suddenly he hears the sound of the voices of all the boys in the distance and realizes that it is Sayan's voice. He quickly approaches and hides side of the truck with curiosity, realizing that the entire group is there hunting zombies, but he doesn't notice that under the vehicle the body Chuya's mutated is crawling towards him and quickly grabs his leg, making him fall to the floor. This panics him when he sees how he is about to be devoured. Just when the zombie was about to attack Sang, the protagonist appeared out of nowhere and ended eliminating him with his rifle. After saving him, he looked at him seriously and asked him what he was doing here, which Sang, still surprised being alive, he could hardly believe it without. However, the plot's attention soon deviated towards Sang's left arm, where he noticed a bite mark on it. Then Sang did not hesitate to raise his weapon, aiming firmly but visibly nervous. He asked him not to do it because he had something important to confess to him. Sangha admitted that he was infected and didn't have much left time before becoming a mutant. However, before succumbing to his destiny, revealed that Yantao, to whom called a despicable human being, had kidnapped his wife and son and used them as blackmail hostages for sabotage towards Xiaoyan and seize his resources. With a broken voice, sadly, he confessed that although he was not a man, nobleman did not believe he had done something unforgivable, and his family, on the other hand, was innocent and knew that the minions of Yantao would not spare their lives. So very desperately begged Xiaoyan to take care of them as payment for the help that had shielded him in the past. Suddenly Xiaoyan silently reflected, because even though Sang also sought his own benefit, he could not deny that at the time it had been great help for him. Then looked around, evaluating the strength. He still had capacity for more people, although it was unbalanced with more men than women. Suddenly a system message appeared before him with a new mission, which was to rescue the wife and son of Sang. And after that, other task was also activated, which was to clear the zombies that were around the area. After reading the messages, Xiaoyan addressed Sang, assuring him that he would take care of his family. After hearing this, he knelt before him very grateful, and with tears in his eyes he said he could never pay her on this life, but in the next he would be his very loyal servant. Then in a serious tone asked him to end his life before transforming. But Xiaoyan, a bit confused, looked at him in silence, and instead of fulfilling the request, he gave a ordered Chanchan to bring one bicycle from the warehouse. With this he told Sang that he should go away to a place desolate where no one was put in risk. In that dazed Sang asked why was he doing this, but Xiaoyan was bluntly and indicated that he did not have time for explanations, then simply he had to do it. With a certain resignation, Sang obeyed and got on the bike and walked away, while the tears kept coming at the thought of his wife and son. Meanwhile, Xiaoyan began to gather the corpses of the zombies, dousing him with gasoline. Then he lit a lighter and set them on fire, fulfilling one of the tasks of the system. Then addressed the group, declaring that some were already capable to defeat a zombie with close-ranged weapons without receiving damage, but warned that they were not yet ready to face hordes. After this brief talk, ordered them the group to follow him. After this talk, asked them to follow him. Before breakup, Oyen confided to the grandfather the key to the weapons warehouse, since he was planning to head into town that night, and the safety of the refuge would be in his hands. Worried, the grandfather asked if he would really go alone, knowing that the city was chaos. But suddenly Sanchai appeared with the rest of the group, offering to accompany him. But Xiaoyan told them that it was not necessary because he didn't want to put their lives in danger, and besides, they would be nothing more than a burden. Soon Xiaoyan got into his vehicle equipped with various weapons. While he was checking the system store, he saw something desperate when he noticed how slow which was the store update. And although the mission seemed difficult, he decided refresh the catalog, in that 3 new items appeared, but the cost of update the store was increasing. However, the objects were worth it, which without hesitation exchanged his points for a box containing a serum capable of improved physical strength. And without thinking about it, he injected a lot of it and felt like his body began to strengthen. Meanwhile, in Sang's house, and his wife children were still kidnapped, he was trying to calm his son, promising that his father would soon rescue them. But their hopes were dashed when door burst open. On that, the boy's father friendly tells him to the protagonist, who comes with them, because they are more than they can be stronger, also the policeman whose name is Captain Lee, and he will be able to protect him from the zombies. To which Xiaoyan, when listening this, smiles and laughing thanks them honestly because of their treatment. In that they ask the protagonist who he plans with find in that mansion, because whether it be a family member or a girlfriend, apocalypse situation reduces chances of them being alive. Therefore he tells him to be mentally prepared for that. In that the Captain Lee says that he is right because even if they were not eaten by the mutants, surely they have already been harmed by those animals. Zioyan, after hearing this, asks what they mean by animals, which he tells him to is about a gang of thugs which gather on the Bujui mountain. They are in charge of eliminating the survivors without any remorse to secure his own survival. In fact, the captain claims that they have already been found and have lost quite a few of their men. Then he says there is no need to talk anymore about that, and tells the protagonist that keep his guard always up without however. While saying this, a zombie approaches him from behind to attack him. He quickly turns around and with one shot in the head, the zombie is dispatched. However, it is already too late because the gunshot sound will attract many other zombies in the area. This causes the captain is quite nervous and is wondering what he will do now, but quickly sights a bus to the distance with which he gives the order everyone to run and hide there. While Zioyan runs, in his mind believes that fleeing in this way can make even more zombies could come closer. But that bus is also a very good option, perfect for defense, for which he believes that the decision that the police made was not so bad. After they all entered the bus, the captain tells everyone to be careful and that in each of the seats in case there isn't some mutant that is hiding inside. In that boy warns everyone that zombies they have not given up, and they are all zombies gathering outside the bus. There are more and more, and they are eager to enter. However, the captain is at his limit because he can hardly hold them at the entrance. Then Zioyan approaches and extending his hand, he commands blow up all the zombies at the entrance. This impresses the policeman, who wonders how it is possible to have a force of that magnitude. But Zioyan tells him not to worry, because he will guard the door so that it does not open. Therefore he can go along with the others and keep the zombies away from the windows. On the other hand, he has broken the bus window to be able to dispatch the zombies that every time are more. When the captain arrives, he cannot avoid thinking that there are many mutants and doesn't think he has enough bullets in his gun to take charge of all of them. In that the protagonist appears to offer him his crossbow, saying use it instead. This leaves with confusing to the captain, who wonders where did he get a weapon like this. But he tells him that he picked it up somewhere else, and finally finished shipping to all the zombies in the place, clearing the whole area. In that the son of Song can avoid feeling euphoric by saying who have escaped death twice, and it can't be just luck, claiming that they are surely the chosen of the apocalypse. But Zioyan still advises them to remain alert always and don't make mistakes like those again. On the other hand, in the protagonist's shelter, Jinan has offered himself to be the guard during that night, but in that Zioyan with a joking attitude asks why he is so eager to be on guard today, but he gets mysteriously upset with him, and he speaks harshly, to which Zioyan tells him calm down because he don't have to being so defensive about it. Grandpa, upon hearing this, he tells everyone that Jimin will be the one to do the guard duty tonight, and everyone should go to their rooms to rest. After a good time, Jimin meets sitting on his guard without any apparent problem, but soon give an opinion himself that it is already somewhat late, and that surely everyone should be already asleep. This is how he gets hands on the works and decides to do what he has in mind before the protagonist returns. So he quickly enters the room of the grandfather to try to steal his key in a stealthily way. While approaching slowly, he extends his hand to grab the key, but it ends waking up Grandpa on the spot, which this one asks him what is it doing. So Jimin proceeds hastily to punch him in head to try to knock him out, but the grandfather reproaches him and orders him to give the keys back. These screams resonate throughout the hallway and end waking up everyone else. On it, Chanchin asks his grandfather what it is, what happens, and he responds that keys to the weapons warehouse have been stolen. Therefore, he orders everyone let them hurry to stop him. While Yimin is running, this is starting to hinder the chase by throwing quite a few things on the floor. After this stops to see the doctor's room where was his friend who turned into zombie. So with an idea malicious in mind decides to enter. It is like that as once inside it approaches to free him. However, this from the nothing seems to have broken from its ties, to which Jimin thinks is a perfect situation, because that's how we'll save the work of having to untie it on his own. While the group approaches the room, they notice that a zombie is hanging around giving them the back, and in that Sanchai realizes that his friend's zombie has been released, and that is something that can attack with everyone's lives. On the other hand, grandfather thinks that there would never be. He imagined he was so evil, which they have no choice but to do everything possible to relock the zombie in the medical room. Then he ordered all the boys to spread and use the methods that the protagonist taught them to defend themselves. Once they all position themselves, rush towards the zombie, and Sanchai immediately grabs him by the neck to keep it in place, while the others hold him by the arms, and once they have it under control, proceed to put it back into the medical room quickly, and finally they close the door. Before this, everyone asks if it was easy enough that they imagined when subjecting him without. However, they have already lost a lot of time, and evil Jimin surely it's already has taken all the weapons in the warehouse. But in that he appears and tells them no, he was able to find all the weapons since they were hidden by Zioyan, but at least he managed to get hold of one that was there. So he pointed it towards their former allies, and Jimin threatens them let them enter the medical room. But Sanchai, with a look of disappointment, he told her that for what he is doing, since the protagonist was the one who saved them. However, Jimin reproaches him with what a great favor can become the downfall of all, claiming that the protagonist has a lot of ego, and now everyone has become their slaves for life. In response to these crude comments, Grandpa can't help but think that there are some people who are ungrateful by nature, and it doesn't matter how good he are with them. However, Jimin way aggressively tells them to shut up, good time for all, and obey his orders. Changing scene, the protagonist meet the other group, and the Captain Lee is giving him the directions of how arriving at the mansion. He mentions that the terrain of that place is quite complicated, which can be perfect for the zombies to hide, and mentions that once he completes his mission he must meet them at the main entrance, which the protagonist, after listening this, raises his thumb in sign of having understood and quickly stands up to them. At that point, Song asks Captain Lai if they shouldn't stop him since it was him who saved them a while ago. Though he tells him that it doesn't matter how much they have told him not to go alone, since he's still stubborn about wanting to go. For another side, the cynic of Yantao is in the building still waiting for new news, but little by little it begins to come to the conclusion that surely San is not even alive anymore. In that, one of his followers tells him that he is already tired to wait and want to do what he wants. So he will tie the wife to don't try to end her life, and they will do what they want. In the face of this, one of the other henchmen comment that it is fine but warns them to be careful. However, he turns his gaze towards the window and sees that at the entrance the zombies that were below have been annihilated, leaving him somewhat uneasy. This is how that one of them opens the door to investigate, questioning whether it's about a rescue, but suddenly a terror invades him and a sharp blade and swift cuts his neck before he can react, being eliminated in a matter of seconds. At the same time, men approach wife and son of Sang, to what the mother, filled with despair, orders them to move away. But two men look at her with sinister smiles that chill her blood, and soon one of them tells her to stop pretending. To what the woman with anguish screams, asking what they are doing and demanding that they leave alone to her son while he is arching his side, which intensifies her horror. But in that despicable guy give him a slap, making the child fall to the ground, but despite of palpable fear he kneels and promises to fight bravely for his mother. But suddenly he is thrown out the door with unforeseen brutality, and in a desperate act the boy confronts the men, begging to be set free mother, and reminding them that their father is not will forgive them this. And just in that moment a man is thrown into the room, causing the child to scream terrified. Continually scared, looks towards the shadow that appears at the door, and finally our protagonist introduces himself, and he asks the boy if his father is Sang. To what the trembling child murmurs a response, visibly shocked. Meanwhile, the mother, consumed by the despair, cowers in a corner, and suddenly Yantao slaps her and full of anger yells at if he are afraid that his son heard her, threatening her that if she doesn't cooperate the consequences will be very serious. In that, one of the accomplices points out that since there is no response, he will take the lead and gently caresses the head of the woman, who cries disconsolately. But suddenly, in that instantly, the bedroom door opens suddenly, and a henchman mentions to the boy who has guts to do that. But in an unexpected turn his neck is cut short on that Yantao. Upon realizing the chaos, he goes back to the door and asks for they haven't gotten rid of the child. Yet when suddenly one of his accomplices his feet fall dead, when he sees this Yantao gets anxious wondering what is happening. But in the blink of an eye Xiaoyan grabs his head and throws it back making it crash against the wall, which impacts very strongly making him spit blood immediately. One of the accomplices very confused he asks who he is, but the protagonist responds with a kick accurate that leaves the man trembling. Meanwhile at the fortress Jimin holds his gun warning that he will shoot if he do not leave his sight, and he orders others to listen and go to the indicated room, ensuring that the villain has a weapon and that they must obey it while they make a plan. And in that Jimin with an evil smile asks if anything they think they can do something against him, and warns that if he do not demonstrate cruelty right now will never establish his control is as well as smiling mentions that the old man will be the first to fall, which causes them to Chanshin and Sanchai shout in dismay, demanding him to stop. However, at that moment Jimin observes the door of the nurse wondering what noise it was. Surprised by this wonders about what is happening and how he unlocked the door to the infirmary. And suddenly in that Chan became zombie appears in front of everyone. Everyone immediately wonders if it was Chan who unlocked the door, although they consider it impossible because he is a zombie and wouldn't use one key. While Jimin disbelieving he observes Chan and, astonished, asks what is happening to what is very furious. He approaches Jimin, dropping drool from his mouth as if he had something pending against him. But immediately Jimin points the gun at him ensuring that he cannot allow a zombie that knows how to use a key to open the door stay alive. So without hesitation he shoots him with everything against the zombie, but to his surprise the gun doesn't work. At that moment Jimin feels distressed and shouts that the gun is blocked, and Chan then takes advantage this to launch while Jimin full panicked asks how is it possible that this is happening. And it is like that zombie begins to devour him little by little and then drags him towards one of the rooms. As the tension the group grows begins to wonder what is happening and observe with concern like Chan now it seems be a little calmer. Also everyone look at Chan in disbelief and astonishment, and for his part the old man when he saw the torrent of blood covers the mouth in a gesture of horror. Later the zombie heads to the door with keys in hand and suddenly throws the keys towards the group, and they fall in front of them surprisingly. Then the zombie returns to the infirmary as if nothing would have happened. Before this situation everyone looked at each other in amazement because they still couldn't assimilate what was happening since it was supposed to zombies attacked people instinct, but this was not the case of the good Chan. Returning to our protagonist, this has finally managed to contain all the bandits and in that with a voice firmly calls the child to come closer, which this scared and confused observes him and asks what he wants. While both the terrified child's mother hugs tightly and questions Xiaoyan what does he intend to ask of his son. However, the protagonist ignores the woman and calls the child again, who despite out of fear he separates from his mother and says that everything will be fine. Then Xiaoyan hands him over a knife and instructs him to take it. Then with a cold look directs the men who were tied up and orders the boy to finish them. After hearing this immediately men beg for mercy, while the completely shocked mother screams that he is only a child. But despite her supplications he addressed seriously to the child, stating that from that instantly the rules change, and he explains that these men are guilty of the death of his faith. Or before this revelation, the boy watches the men with fear in his eyes and finally with his gaze fixed and full of terror, screams and attacks against them. After finishing off the men, an exhausted Yuten sighs in relief realizing that everything is over, and at that moment the mother shouts his name horrified at the scene. Then Yuten asks Xiaoyan if his words are true, if he really was deaf. Our protagonist tells him that indeed it was true. When hearing this the mother runs up hugging her son and begging Xiaoyan to take him to a safe place and assures him that she will do anything in exchange for that. However, the child tells her that he will not leave and he wishes to remain at her side to protect her. And in response Xiaoyan states that they will both go with him and assures that everything will be fine since he promised, saying that he would keep them safe. Already being outside the building, three walk in the dark of the night apocalyptic, and at one point Yuten comes across a lot of bodies of zombies and people lying in the ground. And surprised he wonders what kind of being can take down so much zombies. To which Xiaoyan responds with that it was him, but suddenly he raises his hand and asks him to stop for a moment. He looks to the side and asks the woman if she has any idea where is the 8th building of the Ranjiang garden, to what she, surprised, tells him that he should be in the direction he are facing and asks him what the reason is. Meanwhile, in the 8th building, a group of armed men have just arrived at the place, and the leader proclaims that he will redistribute the supplies fair and square, and orders that all women under 40 years of age accompany them. Meanwhile, inside the building, the group advances with fear, led by the Captain Lee, and they are going to the front. But at that point, a member of the group asks about what to do and suggests that the best thing is to surrender. However, Captain Lee responds that those men do not keep their promises, and in the end no one but women will date life. But suddenly the leader of the bullies warns them that they have 10 minutes, and if they do not cooperate, he will not let no one alive. In that, a woman proposes that maybe they should come out and apologize, but the other opposes, stating that no one wants to become his toy. Which approaches the building with a great determination, and without thinking twice, Xiaoyan opens fire against the bandits, and one of them screams in pain when falling with a shot that eliminates him instantly. And at the same time, another bully watches as his partner collapses his side. Before this, 2 men quickly shoot at the protagonist, but Xiaoyan dodges very easily, mind all these attacks, mocking their lack of skill. And suddenly this appears behind the leader without losing his sight not a single second. At what this very nervous bandit asks where that crazy guy came from. But without hesitation, Xiaoyan begins to open fire against him, which was hidden behind a small closet, and in that, when he saw that they were not doing anything, he asked one of his men they were doing while he kept him busy and yells at them to shoot. Which, upon hearing this, the other bandit cursing points towards Xiaoyan. But before he can execute his attack, the protagonist quickly turns around and shoots him, causing the bandit to scream in pain after receiving 2 hits in that leader. When he saw that he did not make any more attack, he laughs and asks if maybe his bullets have run out. And without doubt he comes out of hiding, warning him to prepare to die. However, this remained very calm at all times when suddenly that bandit opens fire against him. But despite the distance towards Xiaoyan, manages to dodge the shot very easily, and then grabs the leader's arm and twists it, and then finish him off in just a few moments. Then watches as the boss's body falls to the ground, and then Xiaoyan approaches the fallen bandit and kneels to check his pulse. After this, our protagonist enters the building, and 3 armed men with axes wait for him at the entrance. But Xiaoyan observes them seriously when suddenly the 3 of them attack at the same time. However, this dodged the attacks, and in the blink of an eye, closing his eyes, kills them all. After that, our protagonist orders everyone to come out, and then San's son tells him that he just performed an impressive feat, and at the same time several people looked out from their hiding places to find out what is happening. But suddenly it comes a notification for Xiaoyan informing him that he had a new mission, which was about recruiting survivors of Rongzhang Garden with a 25-point reward. After read this mission, our protagonist asks who are those people, to whom the Captain Lai clarifies that they are the beasts of the villages by Chuna. Intrigued by this information, Xiaoyan questions about this village, which Captain Lai answers that it is located south of the city, and at that moment 2 friends come running, and Captain Lai indicates that they hurry to inform the plot about Baichuna that they came from that area. This is how these 2 explain to Xiaoyan that gang it is well armed, and they hide in the Baichuna villages, having captured almost all southern survivors. Reflecting about what Sayan-si had heard, he wonders if that is the place where had settled Lichuan and Kinji in their previous life, and begins to doubt whether it really could be there. Next asks if they are claiming that Bichon it is the only refuge left in the south, which one of the men in yellow says yes, explaining that it wasn't like that before. However, because of their weapons, the smaller settlements could not defend themselves, and adds that those bandits eradicated half of the population in the areas they control, and then they kidnap young and beautiful women as well as those who are willing to collaborate. When he hears this, Xiaoyan concludes that they must indeed be them, to which the captain, surprised, asks him what that means. Then the protagonist asks him to review to the 3 men to verify if they have extra chargers, since this will later serve later. The Captain Lai mentions that it is likely that there is more. Then our protagonist tells him save his weapon, and also that rifle, leaving 5 chargers for him. In the face of this unexpected surprise, Captain Lai, very stunned, look at the rifle and the chargers, And at that moment Zioyan affirms that the Buggy Mountain bandits will not yield very easily, but mentions that even with these few weapons they will be able to handle a dozen people. Therefore orders them to stay here for a few days while he returns to their shelter to reorganize and come back to face all those bandits. However, one of the men in yellow, very surprised, asks if is he being serious, pointing out that Zioyan has no chance against them since they are many. And likewise, Captain Lee warns him that it is not worth taking that risk and suggests that they should look elsewhere. He also points out that that site is several kilometers and they will not be able to check the whole city. However, the protagonist ensures not to worry, as that this is a personal matter between him and those bandits, and finally mentions that in a few days he will return with another vehicle big enough to take everyone eastward of the city. Upon hearing this, the captain, surprised, asks him what he means with the other side of the city, to which Zioyan confirms that it is close to the old City T building, where he has established a fortress and he needs help. Finally, the captain says that now he understands, and our protagonist says goodbye, asking them to be careful and stay alert in the meantime. Outside the building, the zombies lie without life on the ground, and elsewhere in the roof of a building nearby Chuna, a guard looks carefully at what is happening. Later we can see the bodies of 3 zombies hanging on the entrance of Bichun, and 4 men are sitting around a table discussing heatedly about a matter. In that moment, an elegant man dressed in white and bespectacled named Wen Chung asks if they have already gotten the center supplies from the entertainment center, to what Lai Chuang replies that he has sent some of his team, and that they should return soon. And at that, one of the men mentions that there are very powerful people living in the Jinju mansion, so they couldn't just focus on supplies in Entertainment City. Lai Chuang tells this guy that he have already indicated to his men to bring any survivor. However, when Good Chun reproaches him for not having complied with none of the tasks assigned to him, Li Chang assures that there is no reason to get busy and promise that this time everything will go as planned. This is how, after this conversation outside the building, Lai Chuang approaches one of his men visibly fatigued. He asks if everything is okay, but Lai Chuang without hesitation asks about the whereabouts of the 7 men who sent, which this guy, very nervous, explains that an hour ago he sent someone to investigate, and there are very bad ones news. Hearing this, Li Chuan very angrily asks if everyone had been eliminated and questions how it was possible that only 3 weapons could finish them off. If in reality the people who were in the Rong Zhang building were common civilians, and very furious orders that they notify to Taesu to gather all those who are more skillful, since this time it will not allow that the situation gets out of control.